On this now hallowed ground, more than 150,000 Americans met in battles that helped determine the outcome of our nation's Civil War. At Chickamauga, 3 of the bloodiest days of the entire war. And 8 miles north of Chattanooga, a climactic charge that helped seal the fate of the Confederacy. The sacrifices made at Chickamauga and Chattanooga were the result of a bitter divide, one rooted in an earlier time of conflict, the birth of the Republic itself. During the American Revolution, patriots are emboldened by a radical idea: a government of the people, where all men are created equal. But the ideals expressed in the Declaration of Independence do not apply to all.
Lazy, sorriest bunch of folks we ever paid for.
Slavery has been the ugly exception to the new nation's cries of liberty. By 1860, the United States is home to nearly 4 million slaves. Most toil on southern plantations, working to produce a crop the world economy craves: cotton. By the time Abraham Lincoln takes office in 1861, all political options to preserve the Union have seemingly been exhausted. With America now at war, countless young men are faced with difficult decisions of duty, honor, and country. George W. Van Pelt, the town constable of Coldwater, Michigan, enlists in an artillery unit soon to be known as Battery A, 1st Michigan Light Artillery. His wife, Mary, follows him into the field, volunteering as a nurse. Almost a year later, and 700 miles south, Joshua Calloway reluctantly responds to the Alabama governor's call for volunteers. Calloway, a 28-year-old schoolteacher, does not own any slaves. He leaves behind 2 small children and wife Dulcinea. Most everyone on either side of the rebellion believes the war will be over quickly. But the carnage of the first battles shocks all Americans. What began as a Southern rebellion and a Northern response to preserve the Union is affected by a few strokes of the pen. President Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation declares all slaves in the rebelling states forever free. It is issued January 1st, 1863. In the South, the Emancipation Proclamation is greeted with defiance by whites and with increasing hope by slaves. But for many, this singular document transforms the war into a fight to make men free. Summer 1863. The Union Army plans to stick a dagger into the Deep South. For the Union to achieve victory, the farmlands, arsenals, and factories must be destroyed. The Union Army of the Cumberland advances into the rugged hills of southeastern Tennessee. It is commanded by General William Rosecrans. Standing in the Federals' way is the Confederate Army of Tennessee, commanded by General Braxton Bragg. Joshua Calloway is now an officer in the 28th Alabama.
June 26, 1863. My darling wife, everything is quiet here. It was said that the Yankees were advancing, but we all suppose that it's nothing more than a foraging party. I do hope that this year will close the war. The Lord hasten the day of peace. My love to your mother and our children. Joshua Calloway.
The foraging party is in fact Rosecrans' entire force. The Union commander realizes the key to conquest of the Deep South lies with the town of Chattanooga. Lincoln states that taking Chattanooga is as important as taking Richmond. Early September 1863. More than 100,000 soldiers from two opposing armies are maneuvering around the land surrounding Chattanooga. Lieutenant Henry Sist of Rosecrans' staff.
The fact that these two armies were yet somewhere to meet and engage in deadly strife was apparent to the commanders of both armies. Where and when? That was to be the problem.
When is September 18, 1863. Where is a few miles south of Chattanooga, along the banks of a creek called Chickamauga. Bragg has planned to launch a major attack against Rosecrans. But along the Chickamauga, small detachments of Union soldiers put up stubborn resistance. The outnumbered Union forces withdraw. By sundown, the Confederates eventually swarm across the muddy creek. Bragg's main attack will have to wait one more day. Bragg's plan turned the soldiers of the Union Army to the south, cut off Rosecrans from Chattanooga, destroy the Army of the Cumberland. To counter, Rosecrans consolidates his force, extending troops north along the Lafayette Road.
We were put in motion about sunrise. The day was bright and beautiful, and the world never seemed half so attractive before, now that there was a good chance of leaving it soon. Orderly Sergeant Lytton Cooper, 20th Tennessee Volunteer Infantry.
A little after 7 a.m., Confederate cavalry stumble upon Union soldiers filling their canteens. It is an area where the Confederates expect no contact. What begins as a skirmish almost immediately escalates into a full-scale battle. All day, Federals and Confederate brigades slug it out in the woods west of Chickamauga Creek. The dense canopy of trees causes the battle smoke to hang like a thick, deadly fog. George Miller of the 31st Ohio.
The bullets were singing among the trees, scaling the bark from the trunks. Before, we had been jubilant at the thought of meeting the enemy so soon, but now, the zift and whiz of the bullets coming so near dampened our ardor very decidedly.
In the thick woods near the Winfrey farm is Lieutenant George W. Van Pelt and his Michigan battery. Without warning, a line of Confederate infantry appears on his brigade's right flank. The advancing Confederates are less than 200 yards away. The Michigan men fire 64 rounds. Most sailed over the heads of the charging Confederates. The Michigan battery is overrun. But Van Pelt refuses to abandon his guns. The confusion and bloodletting of Van Pelt's fight is typical of Chickamauga's second day. Despite catastrophic casualties, neither side has gained much ground at Chickamauga. Bragg has repeatedly failed in his attempts to cut off Rosecrans from Chattanooga. At dawn the next morning, all that can be heard at Chickamauga is the sound of Union forces fortifying their defensive positions. A breakdown in communication plagues Bragg's army. The Confederate attack does not begin until 9:30. Bragg will later say that, if not for that 3-hour delay, our independence might have been won. Among the first to challenge the Union defenses is the Kentucky Orphan Brigade, commanded by Brigadier General Benjamin Helm. 2 years earlier, Helm was offered a position with the Union Army by his brother-in-law. Fighting under Helm's command is 22-year-old Johnny Green.
A perfect shower of great talk through our ranks. We fired a volley and rushed upon them. Our beloved and gallant General Helm fell mortally wounded, leading his brigade, which he knew he never fought.
But it is not the relentless attacks on the Union left that determines the outcome of Chickamauga. It's a hole in the Union center. Fatigue and miscommunication on the part of Rosecrans creates a nearly half-mile wide gap in the Union line. By sheer fate, 3 Confederate divisions are marching straight towards the gap. At 11 a.m., 11,000 cheering Confederates pour through. The Confederate breakthrough effectively splits the Union line. Rosecrans and a third of his force leave the battlefield and escape to Chattanooga. The Union right soon crumbles. But not all the Union soldiers leave the field. Remaining on the Union left are soldiers under the command of General George Thomas. On Snodgrass Hill and Horseshoe Ridge, they stand firm. Ready to charge up the steep wooded slope with the 28th Alabama is Lieutenant Joshua Calloway.
My dear love, I have just passed through the terrible ordeal of a hard battle. Our brigade formed at the foot of a long hill, at the top of which was the enemy's line. The battle was raging all along our line, as if heaven and earth were coming together. 1,000 thunderstorms all turned loose could not equal the noise. carnage was awful. Men were shot down all around me. I was indeed in the very midst of death.
Thomas's heroic defense allows the remaining Union forces to escape. For that stand, Thomas becomes known as the Rock of Chickamauga. By day's end, the last of Thomas's men withdraw from the battlefield. The carnage of 3 days of battle is unimaginable. More than 34,000 casualties. Over 4,000 of those are dead. Joshua Calloway somehow makes it through the battle unscathed.
We now moved to the top of the hill and slept on the battlefield, Napoleon's sign of victory. I have now seen and experienced the horrors of war, as well as the spoils and glories. I am very well, thank God. 1,000 kisses for you and the children. Your loving, J.K. Calloway.
Chickamauga is a Confederate victory, but a debatable one at that. Rosecrans has managed to retreat to Chattanooga. In spite of the defeat, the gateway to the Deep South remains in Union hands. In Washington, President Lincoln receives a telegram of the Union debacle. With the report comes devastating news about an enemy officer. Killed at Chickamauga is his brother-in-law, Benjamin Hardin Helm. Lincoln's trusted friend is Supreme Court Justice David Davis.
I never saw Mr. Lincoln more moved than when he heard of the death of his young brother-in-law. Davis, he said,
I feel like David of old when he heard of the death of Absalom.
I saw how grief-stricken he was, so I closed the door and left him.
After the battle, Bragg moves the Army of Tennessee to high terrain towering over Chattanooga. There, he plans to lay siege to the city, cut off all supply lines, and starve Rosecrans into submission. For the next few weeks, the situation for the beleaguered Union force in Chattanooga grows desperate. Rosecrans is relieved of command. General Ulysses S. Grant assumes overall command. Within days of Grant's arrival, supplies and reinforcements begin to slip into Chattanooga. By mid-November, a growing despondency sets in for Bragg and his men. Thousands of lives and precious resources have been lost at Chickamauga. And now the opportunity for a complete victory at Chattanooga is slipping away. Even more disturbing for Bragg's soldiers is this sobering reality. The struggle for Chattanooga will mean yet another battle. Grant's plan: attack the Confederate right along Missionary Ridge, drive Bragg south into Georgia. Entrenched between Lookout Mountain and Missionary Ridge is Joshua Calloway.
Dear Lolly, yesterday I got some fellas to go to the top of Lookout Mountain. While musing thus, I could not help but feeling a spark of ambition, a desire to make my name as immortal as that of Lookout Mountain. My ambition cooled off, and I began to think how I would be perfectly content to be at home with my wife and never thought of after I die. You need not be at all surprised to hear of some demonstration at any moment. Your devoted J.K. Calloway.
November 24th, 1863. Grant orders General William T. Sherman to move toward the Confederate stronghold atop Missionary Ridge. That same day, General Joseph Hooker and some 10,000 Union troops capture Lookout Mountain. The fight becomes known as the Battle Above the Clouds. Yet the battles for Chattanooga are far from over. The next morning, Sherman's assault on Missionary Ridge begins. A Confederate remarks, "We feel we can kill all they send after us." With Sherman's men paralyzed, Grant turns to George Thomas, the Rock of Chickamauga. His order is to attack rifle pits at the base of Missionary Ridge. But Thomas's veterans do not stop there. They scale the heights with one thing in mind: redemption. On the crest, the Confederate defenders are routed. Colonel C. Irvine Walker of General Manigault's staff.
The Yankees moved up to the attack in the most gallant style. I don't think any feat of war can equal their attack on Missionary Ridge. If only our men had held their ground, it would have been child's play. But instead, they fled, panic-stricken before the enemy. When I saw men running, I could not believe they were the heroes of Shiloh, Perryville, Oak Hills, and Chickamauga.
Bragg orders a retreat into Georgia. With the Confederate defeat at Chattanooga, the gateway to the Deep South has been pried open. A junior officer from Bragg's army later calls the retreat from Missionary Ridge the death knell of the Confederacy. The Union victory comes at a terrible cost. The battles of Chickamauga and Chattanooga alone claimed more than 10,000 Confederate and Union lives. Among them, George Van Pelt, killed while heroically defending his Michigan battery. Some 2 weeks after the battles for Chattanooga, Dulcinea Calloway receives another correspondence.
Mrs. J.K. Calloway, it now falls to my unhappy lot to write you a short letter letting you know what has become of your much-beloved husband, Lieutenant Joshua K. Calloway, who fell in the Battle of Missionary Ridge, mortally wounded. While rallying his company, he was shot through the bowels with a minie-ball. We picked him up, started off the field, when he asked us to lay him down and die. I have every reason to believe that he has gone to a better land where there is no more war. The company and officers deeply sympathize with you in his loss. But what is your and our loss is his eternal gain. W.F. Aycock, Lieutenant Company K, 28th Alabama Regiment.
The sacrifices of Calloway, Van Pelt, and others would not be forgotten. Some 20 years after the battles, veterans began to return under one flag. In 1890, Chickamauga and Chattanooga National Military Park is created. It is the nation's first. Today, at Chickamauga and Chattanooga, the sounds of war have long been silenced. But the memories of those who fought remain. In the shadow of Lookout Mountain, these now hallowed grounds remind us that the freedoms we enjoy have come with the greatest of sacrifice.